And for the next hour, we have planned 3 parts. First, I would like to give you a brief overview of Yunus Environment Hub for the ones who might know us yet. And then secondly, I'm going to be presenting the ValuCred program, which was one of the pilot projects of Prevent, where we developed a process standard model for plastic credits that we tested in 4 countries, one of them being India. And I will present our findings, our learnings from these pilots, and we will also have some time for question and answers and interactions. And then thirdly, my colleague Julie, she will present some further findings that we have with regards particularly to the risks and opportunities on the informal sector. And we would like to discuss with you and have planned for a short intervention on your recommendations for the Indian context. So to get started, yes, as Silke mentioned, Yunus Environment Hub is the global social business network for creating solutions to the environmental crisis. And our vision is to create a world of 3 zeros, which is 0 poverty, 0 unemployment, and 0 net carbon emissions. And we do this by developing and supporting social business solutions that address environmental issues in a financially self-sustainable way. And all of our work is built on more than 40 years of experience of Ramin and Professor Yunus, our co-founder and chairman, who developed bottom of the pyramid solutions in Bangladesh and around the world. And the Yunus Environment Hub is the Yunus entity that is specialized on environmental topics. And I think I don't need to explain to you why this is needed, because we are facing a multifaceted environmental crisis that is a global warming crisis, biodiversity crisis, but also a plastic crisis. And one aspect that we often see missing around the discussions on the plastic crisis and circular economy, that the focus is often on the economic and the ecological part, but often the social dimension is missing. And this is one aspect that we bring in as a strong focus, not only on what does this mean for income generation and employability, but also in what new consumption behavior patterns do we need? How do we change behaviors? How can we create new business models that a circular economy requires, and where these innovations can unfold? So here you see the overview of the different areas that we work in, with circular economy being a major focus area. And then within that, a lot of work has been made around the topic of plastics, but also textile waste. Here you can see our impact framework, where you see in the center the green social business entrepreneurs, meaning social business solutions that tackle environmental crisis, whom we support and that we develop. And around that is an ecosystem consisting of private public organizations with whom we work through consultancy, policy advisory, in order to establish an ecosystem where these social business entrepreneurs can fully unleash their impact that they eventually have on the outer circles of society and environment. And of course, all of these interventions also eventually impact and create awareness of society as such. And then our work is divided in 4 different pillars. First and foremost, it's incubation and acceleration programs, where we help social business entrepreneurs in the various stages from idea generation to market entry into becoming investment ready in scaling up their ventures. We have programs that focus on thematic areas such as waste management or sustainable agriculture, but we also have programs where we work with entrepreneurs that come from various sectors, including healthcare, education, and then we help them analyze their business models, and we have a circular impact framework where we help them to make their business models more circular and more resilient for the future, creating long-term green jobs. And then the other areas are venture building. So in many places, we don't have social business solutions yet, so we need to create them. We conduct feasibility studies and then create these social business models and the financial investment plans that are needed and helping in the setup of these ventures. Consulting and public advisory, I already mentioned in the impact framework, a very important pillar, because we need the collaboration and collective impact amongst the different stakeholders. And as such, this is also where our engagement with Prevent comes in, but we also engage in many other public forums, such as the UN Plastic Treaty, where we bring in our recommendations, all the social business solutions to be taken into account. And then lastly, education and training programs. Here you can see the geographic coverage of our programs during the last year. And here a short slide of selection of partners with whom we work. So far, so good. Now I would like to move to the second part that I mentioned, to ValuCred, which is one of the pilot projects that Prevent Alliance promoted. And it is a joint program developed in a consortium between Yunus Environment Hub, Nielsen Erotic, which is a German waste management company, and Black Forest Solution, a waste consultancy. And the objective of ValuCred was to conduct a stakeholder analysis, a market overview of the global plastic credit market. And then in the next step, develop a standard process model in order to coordinate, harmonize, and bring in transparency in this in the ecosystem of plastic credit players. And then as the third step, we tested this standard process model on the plastic waste value chain and in 4 countries in total. We have Vietnam and India that we did with the support of Prevent Waste Alliance, and then an additional partner that enabled us to test it also in Africa, because it was important for us to do this as a co-creational process with the plastic waste value chain and being able to incorporate their feedback while we developed the model. And yeah, in order to make sure that this is actually practicable for the waste workers in the chain and ensuring that it's user friendliness. So the first thing, as I said, was doing this global market analysis. And we started this in January 2021, so about a bit more than 1.5 years ago. And plastic credits is a relatively new instrument, right? There was not that much literature out there, especially in the academic context. And throughout that research, we explored so many new developments and stakeholders. Just while conducting the analysis, we had to actually update our data and information because new players were just popping up within last year. And while talking and interviewing the stakeholders, we saw that there was a huge interest on receiving more information because of the lack of data and reports out there, that we actually decided to put our findings into a report, which is called Plastic Credits Friend or Foe, retrospective of recent market dynamics, that you can find on our website and the Prevent website as well. And I would like to briefly mention what were the key findings and also the recommendations that we formulated in order to coordinate and harmonize the plastic credit market. So our first finding was that we often saw plastic credits being compared to carbon credits, where it was just mentioned, yeah, plastic credits is similar to carbon credits, is very often not taking into account that actually the mechanisms behind are fundamentally different. A carbon credit equals a ton of CO2 emission equivalent, and it doesn't matter where on the world you emit a ton of CO2. It has the same effect on our global warming or global temperature. Whereas plastic waste has very different impacts. It has different impacts of the type of plastic material and different impacts where this plastic waste is being generated and where and how it's being processed or not collected or collected. And also the collection and the treatment and the recycling or disposal has very different costs from one country to the other country. Even in a country like India, it might vary within a country. So this was one aspect that we found, that it's very important to make it clear that the mechanisms behind plastic and carbon credits are different, and we need to be aware not to copy and paste how carbon credits works to plastic credits, because then we will fall into the same pitfalls that carbon credits have, as some of the earlier speakers mentioned, to kind of use it as an easy way out for greenwashing, or actually not reducing CO2 emission, or in the case of plastic credits, the plastic production, but just as a way of showing that something has been done. Then a second finding was that the roles and the responsibilities of the stakeholders involved in plastic credit markets are sometimes overlapping and in general being very intransparent. And basically you have three different stakeholder groups, right? It's the standard setters, it's the plastic credit issuers, and it's the plastic credit buyers. And then often there was an overlap that the plastic credit issuers are also marketplaces, and they might have their own standards or guidelines, making it very difficult kind of to get an understanding of who is doing what in the market, and having this in transparency in the sense that we don't have this clear division of someone who's issuing it cannot be the one certifying or auditing it. Then a third finding is that the plastic credit market lacks a regulatory framework and common terminology. So I think with the regulatory framework, I think this is something fundamentally, also when we compare it to carbon credits, that this will be required if we want plastic credits really sort of being used as a mainstream instrument, right? And with carbon credits, there's the Kyoto Protocol, and we have this international framework that defines the equivalent of a carbon credit, but with plastic credits, we don't have that. And unless that is in place, it will be very difficult, especially if you're looking at the plastic crisis being a global one, right? Most of the many brands, or let's say the polluters who bring in most of the plastic waste into the market are global brands. So for that, we require international frameworks and also the common terminology. Everyone defines plastic credits differently. We have seen this also amongst the different marketplaces or even standard setters, where it's not clear, is a credit a ton of plastic, a kg, or just one bottle? And also with some other expression when it comes to defining the different stakeholders in the plastic waste value chain. If you're talking about, you know, how do we call a plastic collector? Do we call a plastic picker, scrap shop, kabadi, wale, aggregators, right? There's so many different terminologies overall, but then also in some particular countries. And then the fourth finding, that plastic credits are wrongfully treated as commodity trade, disregarding the environmental services of waste workers, right? The waste workers are usually being compensated and paid for the quantities and the plastic types that they're collecting, and not for the hours they have spent on collecting these materials. And this results in the situation that we have right now, that in most parts of the world, only the high-value plastic is being collected and the non-valuable is being disregarded. And plastic credits could be used as a mechanism to incentivize especially the collection of these low-valuable and hard to collect or hard to recycle plastic materials. So what were our key recommendations of the report? It's first and foremost to integrate the principles of independence and impartiality to plastic credit standards and the different stakeholder roles. I think this is very important and necessarily also for clear communication to educate and have like the audience of potential plastic credit buyers and issuers understand how the system works, and also for them to better understand where the risk and opportunities for them might lie in. And then secondly, to align plastic credit schemes and regulating standards with EPR principles. And I think I don't need to say much about that because Henning had elaborated a lot on this earlier this morning, that plastic credits should not be used as a way to undermine EPR efforts, especially in countries like India, where you already have an EPR legislation, but also in other countries where this might not be the case yet, but rather see it as a bridging mechanism, as something that can be done now on the, let's say, short-term, immediate term to address the crisis and not wait until an EPR regulation might be in place. And then thirdly, stop comparing plastic credits to carbon credits. So I think this is pretty obvious. And number 4, pricing of plastic grades should follow social and environmental criteria and the needs of local waste management stakeholders. So this relates to the last point that I mentioned about the environmental service that waste workers are delivering, and that we need to look at if we have one plastic credit, how do we divide and channel this plastic grade on the plastic waste chain. I think this was mentioned before lunch, right? That the majority should be going to the waste collectors who are working under very harsh situations. And the question is, so how do you divide one plastic credit? If it's the recycling company who receives it, what stays with the recycling company? What does the aggregator or the scrap shop or the informal, the waste collector or collecting companies receive? And then number 4, stakeholders involved in plastic grid market, that there's this need to adopt a common language. And one approach on doing this is that we managed to bring the currently, I think, 5 voluntary standard setters on one table. And within Prevent Waste Alliance, we hosted some sessions to start this dialogue. And one joint statement was issued earlier this year. And I think this will be very important to keep the discussion going on, aligning and creating their harmonization. So so these were the findings, the recommendations that we had from the report, and it was received with great interest, and from many stakeholders in the market, where we also saw, okay, there is potential there, but it's really important that we need to look at the topic carefully and that more research is required. That we also see, especially when it comes to the risks and finding ways to mitigate those. And but our work was not only theoretical in doing the report, as mentioned, but it was about developing a standard process model that can be used as of now for plastic credits, but also actually as a way for countries who are just beginning to implement EPR. Because what we basically did with the standard process model is to look at the activities in an operating EPR system. And you can see some of the process elements there, helping to create standardization of the interaction processes between the stakeholders involved in generating and trading the plastic credits. And what was very important for us is that we did not want to reinvent the wheel. So we were looking at existing reporting standards, at existing management systems that the global brands already use, and picking out the relevant ones that we saw would fit this context. So the standard process model is built on the UN SDGs. It's built on the global reporting initiatives, I think taking 18 out of the 23 requirements out, and also the ISO standardization. Because it was very important for us that we don't create something new, but something that is also integratable to the management system that companies already have. And with the standard process model, the attempt is to define common understandings, common terminology, and also a transparent process, building trustworthiness into the plastic credit market. And I mean, also eventually building up capacities and skills that are needed in order to cope up with the quantities that that the recycling sector still needs to develop, because right now we know that there is more demand that actually offer. And eventually filling the gap until EPR systems are in place, or as we see in the case for India, maybe running as something complementary where plastic credits is actually part of an EPR system. And then, as I mentioned, we tested the standard process model with the lower part of the plastic waste value chain, meaning at the level of waste collectors, and then collection points, scrap shops, and aggregators. And we did this in 4 different countries, one of them being in India. And again, with the objective to receive the user feedback that we could incorporate while still developing the standard process model. And taking learnings on what needs to be taken into account to roll the model out on, let's say, on a broader scale, and actually see if this is something that will be accepted and is actually doable. And how we went about with the testing was that we had a 6-month time frame, which now looking back would have been great if that time frame would have been longer, because for the onboarding and the training of the participants, we had quite a long variance of, let's say, between 4 weeks, which was how we planned, up to 12 weeks for some of them, to have them fully onboarded and trained. And of course, if you have a testing phase of 6 months and then half of the time you require for the onboarding, the results of the actual testing and feedback round that we got was somehow limited. So this was already kind of one learning that I can share, that this testing is really important, that it's always good to have sufficient time for that. And we had a total of 5 different training modules that covered different aspects of ValuCred and the solid process model, such as in the beginning, of course, explaining what all of this is about, and which is quite challenging, because especially if you're talking to the waste collectors, concepts like plastic credits or EPR, that's not their language, right? For them, it's very difficult to understand where you're coming from. For them, it seems something very theoretical, which is sort of not part of their reality. So finding kind of a language and putting in efforts on explaining them why we are doing it, and also importantly, making them understand how this would benefit them, maybe not at this point, but at a future point, at a time point in the future, which is also very challenging, because many of them, they live day to day out of what they earn on that specific day. And many of them, they're not interested about any promises or things that they hear that someday in the future might bring to them. So this is also one aspect, that you really need to build up a relationship and trust to them to basically gain them on board for participating in such a test. And then other training sessions, they evolved around digital literacy training, because the standard process model is connected to a digital interface, and we also needed a digital application for the waste quantity tracking. And most of them, they have smartphones. However, in some places, they use the smartphone for pushing a button to answer a call, pushing a button for closing the call, but not necessarily for something else. And there was also a lot of hesitation in the beginning, that they thought like we would ask for them very, difficult things, and which is actually not, right? It's like entering data on an app is something that all of them learned very quickly. But these were some aspects, and then some other aspects related to the socioeconomic information that we required, and the feedback loops throughout that testing phase. And then basically what happened throughout that testing was that they entered information on the waste quantity and material types on a digital solution that we used from CleanHub, who is also presented here. And this information, this data, was then fed into the ValuCred digital interface, where we have another set of questions and like socioeconomic factors that we asked the stakeholder to answer. And then both of these data sets sort of were fed together, and we were able to create respective reports on showing like exactly which sort of materials were collected from which person and what their socioeconomic, let's say, the background is. And this information was sort of measured at different points. One was, let's say, the first level aggregation of scrap shops collection points where waste collectors bring their point. And another level was at a bigger aggregators level, where several scrap shops usually bring in the waste, where then further processing is happening. And throughout the testing phase, we had then different feedback loops that were questionnaires that we sort of asked all of them to answer. And I've also brought some pictures that you can see from India, where we have tested this with partners in Tamil Nadu, where you can see on the right picture. You see on the right side is the man who manages an aggregation business, and then next to him, the man and the wife on the left side who are managing the scrap shop, and in between of them is our project staff when they sort of first started with the pilot testing and making the arrangements. And on the left side, you see one of the waste collectors who were signing and entering information on the questionnaires. And here are some more pictures of the work, especially in the beginning. And I wanted to, okay, it's not here. Well, I wanted to show you one picture where you see that each of the waste collectors basically got a QR code for the easy scanning of information, so that also this was easily implemented, let's say, in the day-to-day operations, because of course their time is precious, so we did not want to bother them with taking too much of their time for registering that data and all of the information. And so what were the key lessons learned from the testing? Well, first of all, most exchanging waste management data between different digital solutions requires standardization. And this was also one important aspect from us, is we did not want to create our own app, but we developed the ValuCred SPM as a digital interface where you can connect existing apps, such as CleanHub, but it could have been also any other app that you use for data collection. Yet still, it requires standardization, and there are things that need to be figured out that might not be as easy as it is on the first side. And then second, acquiring personal data of waste collectors can cause mistrust and also anxiety among them. And I mentioned this, that in some places it took us a long time to onboard them, not only on the training, but even on convincing them to be part of the pilot testing. Because some waste collectors, you know, that they might not have an idea or be registered, they might be migrant workers, and they were afraid, okay, what are we doing with their data? Is this something, are we spying on them on behalf of the government, or what will we do with it? And it was also difficult to make them understand why we are collecting the information on the waste quantities, the types of the prices, but it was actually not this data that we needed for it as such, but we needed it for creating the reports that created the overall reports that we wanted in order to get this transparency on the waste value chain. And as I mentioned before, I think it's that you need to spend time on the trust building and finding a good way of making them understand what this is about. And what we observed very interestingly was that once we sort of onboarded the first waste collectors and the testing was ongoing, then suddenly other waste collectors came and wanted to join. I think that once they see, okay, this is all working well and they're actually getting something out of it, then suddenly we had a lot of people coming asking, hey, can you come back to us if you want to do this again? And it's also something that we saw in the last 40 years when Professor Yunus developed the Grameen Bank and the microfinance movement, that it was the same thing there. It took a long while to convince sort of the first woman to join the program, and then once there, it just quickly spread from one village to the other. And I think for something like that, it will be the same. And we also received the feedback of many of them why they were hesitant in the beginning with the digital literacy, where they said like, no, we cannot do what you're asking us. In the end, they were like, yeah, actually, it was easier than we thought. And we're also not afraid to learn new things if this is something that benefits our livelihoods. And the other learning here, integration of informal waste management stakeholders requires extensive training and capacity building in advance. And this is not only for testing, but if you want to roll this out like in a larger scale, something really necessary to help them improve their livelihoods and see that it is something valuable that they're doing. And it was quite heart touching for many of them that when we did the end evaluation this week and last week, that they came to us saying that this is the first time in their life someone is appreciating the work that they're doing. And this is also something that is very important for us at Yunus Environment Hub, that we give dignity to the waste workers, to anyone involved in the waste value chain, and helping them to live a life in dignity. And then last lesson learned, I guess it's probably not a surprise that, of course, the financial benefit is the main driver for participation. And yeah, I think I don't need to explain much to you about that they are making very little, and often they're doing this as a side business to top up even other jobs that they're working. And that our ambition should be that we are able, especially in an EPR system or a country that has an EPR scheme like India, that we're able to pay everyone at least living wages. So yeah, these were a brief overview of ValuCred's standard process model and the lessons learned from the pilot testing. Our sort of next steps in the program would be an upscaling part to test it on the, let's say, upper chain of the plastic waste value chain, meaning from aggregator to recycler, and then APO or the brands. And doing this also on a national context in order to enforce the requirement for making plastic credit purchases as something that companies need to do, that is mandatory for the entire offset of what they're putting on the market, that we heard in the previous lectures, and that we're going to also talk about a bit later. But yeah, now I'm happy to hear if any of you have a question or some thoughts that arise from this presentation.